Welcome to the MyBard story.
And welcome to another deep dive into the biblical text. Today, we're turning a really significant corner in the narrative as we look at Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 through 9.
Yes, we've spent time in those early chapters of Genesis, seeing creation, the fall, sin escalating, judgment.
Right, and the scattering at Babel. But now, chapter 12, it's like God is hitting the reset button in a new way, initiating something entirely fresh.
A pivotal new beginning, really, in God's redemptive history. And it starts with just one man, Abram.
Exactly. So our mission today is to unpack these foundational verses. We want to get a feel for the radical nature of God's call, the promises, and, see their lasting significance for God's big plan and for us today.
Okay, let's dive right in. Our notes walk us through this passage verse by verse, pointing out key things, context, and some, really insightful perspectives. We'll use the NIV. Start with Genesis 12, verse 1. The Lord had said to Abram, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you."
Okay, right away, that opening just hits you. A divine command, an imperative. Go.
And the Hebrew phrase is lek leka, isn't it?
That's it, like leka. It's more emphatic, not just go. Scholars suggest it could mean go for yourself, like implying a really radical, decisive break, or maybe just conveying go all the way.
It definitely doesn't sound like a casual suggestion.
Not at all. It's a call for complete separation. And notice the threefold command.
Yes, leave your country, your people, and your father's household. It feels like it's designed to sever every single tie.
Precisely. Think about that progression. Your country, the wider political entity. Then your kindred or people, that Hebrew word molin, it's like homeland, birthplace, or even more intimately, your relatives, your clan.
And then the deepest tie of all.
Your father's household. The immediate family unit you depend on. It moves from broad to incredibly personal, breaking increasingly intimate bonds. It really underlines the depth of obedience required here.
It's hard to imagine how challenging that must have been, leaving everything familiar, everything secure.
Everything.
Yeah.
And think about this. Was the destination clear? Did he get like a map or directions?
No, the text just says, "To the land I will show you."
Exactly. And that's where the radical nature of Abram's faith just shines through immediately. The destination is totally unspecified at first.
Wow.
Yeah. Someone like Gerhard von Rad really highlights how crucial this detail is. It demands, profound faith, complete reliance on God's moment-by-moment guidance.
Stepping out into the total unknown.
Absolutely. Dependent on God leading the way day by day. This kind of blind obedience, just following God's word without the full picture, it becomes fundamental to who Abram is.
And there's even some discussion about where this call first happened, right? Because the text here says he left from Haran, but other parts of the Bible seem to point earlier.
That's right. Here in Genesis 12, it says he left Haran. But if you look at Stephen's speech in Acts 7, it suggests the call came way back in Ur of the Chaldeans.
So how do scholars reconcile that?
Well, figures like Kenneth Matthews and Victor Hamilton suggest a two-stage call, probably an initial callback in Ur, which got his father Terah moving towards Canaan, though they stopped in Haran.
Okay.
Then maybe after Terah settled there, God renewed that call specifically to Abram in Haran. That view helps bring the different accounts together. It suggests Abram was already starting to respond to God even before this moment in Genesis 12.
So it wasn't just about moving house. It was a deep spiritual and cultural break, too.
Oh, absolutely. Think about Ur and Haran. They were major centers for moon worship in the ancient world. Leaving them meant leaving behind a deeply ingrained pagan culture, a whole religious system.
A complete shift in allegiance.
Exactly. It was a move towards a totally new spiritual reality, centered only on Yahweh, the one true God, a new beginning.
Okay, let's move on to verse 2. Because after this radical command to leave, God starts unpacking these incredible promises. "I will make you into a great nation and I will bless you. I will make your name great and you will be a blessing."
Yeah, this verse just unfolds these magnificent promises. And the very first one, "I will make you into a great nation," is, it's stunning given the context.
Because Sarai was barren, right? And Abram wasn't young.
Exactly. Genesis 11:30 explicitly told us Sarai was barren. And verse 4 here tells us Abram was 75 when he left Haran. From any human standpoint, making a great nation out of them looked completely impossible.
So right away, it points to God's miraculous power.
It has to be God's work. And the word for nation here, goy, that's significant too.
How so? It's not just about having lots of kids.
Right. As Hamilton points out, Goy often suggests more than just numerous people. It implies a structured political entity, something with territory, stability. It hints at a long-term vision.
A nation with land. Okay.
Which sets up the later land promise, yeah. Then he says, I will bless you. And that word bless, it just echoes through these verses.
It shows up 5 times in verses 2 and 3 alone.
5 times. It's absolutely central. It really hammers home this theme of divine favor, God's empowerment for prosperity, fertility, well-being, everything needed for life to flourish.
And it's a gift, not something earned.
Completely. It flows purely from God's gracious initiative towards Abram.
Then he promises to make Abram's name great. That feels like such a direct contrast to the Babel story we just came from.
Oh, it's a brilliant contrast. You hit it. Scholars like Bruce Waltke really draw this out. At Babel, humanity, full of pride, wanted to make a name for themselves. Their goal was human fame, achieved by their own hands.
To avoid being scattered.
Right. But here, God tells Abram, I will make your name great. Renown is God-given, not self-made. And that phrase, make your name great, it pops up elsewhere too, like with King David. It hints at a kind of royal destiny for Abram's line.
Wow. Okay, in the 4th part of verse 2, and you will be a blessing. Not just receiving, but being a blessing.
Yeah, this is huge. It shifts the focus from Abram receiving to Abram becoming a conduit. The Hebrew grammar is interesting, wehe abura. It could be a command, be a blessing, or the result, so that you will be a blessing.
Maybe connected to the command to go.
Many see that connection. Go so that you can become this blessing. You have to leave the old to step into this new role as God's channel of favor to the world. His blessing isn't meant to just stop with him. It's meant to flow through him.
Accumulation versus transmission.
Exactly. It's for transmission.
Okay, verse 3 then expands on how this blessing works, especially in relation to other people. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you.
So here we get the 5th and 6th promises. It sets up this principle. God's going to relate to others based on how they relate to Abram and his descendants.
Divine protection and retribution.
Yeah. If you're good to Abram's line, you get God's blessing. If you treat them with contempt, you face God's curse. It's a strong statement of God's loyalty and a serious warning.
And then that final, massive promise. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. There's a lot packed into that phrase, isn't there? Some debate.
A huge amount. And yes, significant debate around the Hebrew verb nibro. It's the nifl stem of brach, to bless. The core question is it passive, will be blessed, or is it reflexive middle, will bless themselves?
What's the practical difference there?
Well, if it's passive will be blessed, then it's this incredible statement about God's universal plan. It means that through Abram and ultimately through his seed, Christ, God's saving blessing will actively reach all the families, all the peoples of the earth. God is the one actively doing the blessing.
Okay, and the other option?
If it's reflexive will bless themselves, it might mean that other nations, seeing Abram's blessed status, will use his name as a kind of formula, like, may we be blessed like Abram. It focuses more on nations recognizing his blessing, rather than directly receiving God's redemption through him in the same foundational way.
Where most of the scholars we're drawing from land on this?
Many evangelical scholars, like Hamilton, argue strongly for the passive view. Will be blessed. They see it as absolutely foundational. This is God's intention from the start to bless all nations through this lineage, pointing ultimately to the gospel going global through Christ.
Which makes sense with the New Testament connection in Galatians.
Exactly. Galatians 3.8 explicitly interprets it this way. Even scholars like Westerman, who acknowledge the linguistic debate, recognize the massive theological weight of the passive view for a universal plan. And you see hints of it later in Genesis, don't you? Like Laban getting blessed because of Jacob or Potiphar because of Joseph. Blessing does seem to flow out from Abram's line to others.
So the passive view really frames this as the starting point for God's mission to the whole world.
Precisely. It's not just about Israel, it's about blessing all peoples through Israel, through Abram's seed.
Okay, so Abram gets this radical command and these mind-blowing promises. What does he do? Verse 4. So Abram went as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he set out from Haran.
Look at that response. Simple, direct, obedient. So Abram went as the Lord had told him.
No hesitation mentioned.
None. Immediate action based solely on God's word. Our notes rightly highlight this as the first big demonstration of the faith that later gets credited to him as righteousness in Genesis 15. Faith isn't just believing, it's acting on that belief.
And that age detail, again, 75, it just emphasizes the leap of faith.
Totally. 75, it underscores the magnitude of what he's doing, disrupting his whole life. And it reinforces the human impossibility of that great nation promise. It has to be God.
And he leaves before his father dies, right? That seems significant too.
Yes, Terah lived much longer, according to Genesis 11. So Abram prioritized God's call, even over, really strong cultural ties to stay with his father. That's remarkable. And the detail about Lot going with him, that's important too.
Verse 5 tells us a bit more about who made the journey. He took his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, all the possessions they had accumulated and the people they had acquired in Haran, and they set out for the land of Canaan, and they arrived there.
So he takes Sarai, Lot, all their stuff, and the people they'd acquired, servants, retainers. This shows Abram wasn't just some lone wanderer. He was already a man of substance, leading a pretty large group.
Hundreds, maybe, given later stories.
Possibly, especially considering he could later muster 318 fighting men. And notice the verb, he took them. He's the leader now, a shift from the previous chapter where his father Terah was leading.
And now the destination is clear, the land of Canaan.
Yes, what was unspecified in verse 1 becomes concrete now. They set out for Canaan. And that simple phrase, and they arrived there, it just confirms God's guidance was faithful. They made it.
You mentioned Lot's presence being significant. How so? The presumed heir idea.
Yeah, our notes bring that up. Hamilton calls Lot the presumed heir. With Sarai barren, it's natural to wonder, how will this great nation promise happen? Lot, his nephew, is the closest male relative.
So Abram might have seen him as the potential answer.
Possibly, or at least the reader is meant to consider it. Lot's presence creates a narrative tension about inheritance that only gets resolved later when God explicitly says the heir will be Abram's own son. His inclusion is deliberate.
Okay, so they arrive in Canaan. Where's the first stop? Verse 6. Abram traveled through the land as far as the site of Shechem, to the great tree of Moreh. At that time, the Canaanites were in the land.
He travels through the land, exploring, getting the lay of the land as far as Shechem. Shechem's a key spot right in the center, and he stops at the site of Shechem, specifically the great tree of Moreh.
A tree. What's the significance?
Well, Moreh is linked to the Hebrew for teacher or oracle giver. Many scholars think this was probably a known Canaanite sacred site, maybe used for divination. Sacred trees were common religious markers in the ancient Near East.
And then that crucial little note, at that time the Canaanites were in the land. Just dropped in there.
Yeah, that note is vital. People like Wenham and Sarna point out it immediately reminds you this land isn't empty, it's occupied.
So fulfilling the land promise is going to take God's power.
Absolutely. It highlights the human obstacle. And for the original readers, it distinguished Abram's time as a sojourner from their own later conquest. It sets the stage.
So how does God respond to Abram arriving at this significant, possibly pagan location? Verse 7. The Lord appeared to Abram and said, "To your offspring I will give this land." So he built an altar there to the Lord who had appeared to him.
Right here, at this key place, the Lord appeared to Abram. Our notes highlight this is the first explicit theophany, a direct appearance of God in Canaan. It marks the importance of this moment.
And the promise gets more specific.
Yes. To your offspring I will give this land. It clarifies the land is for his descendants, his seed, not necessarily for Abram to fully possess in his lifetime. And it reinforces that the heir comes from him, not Lot.
And Abram's response, build an altar, again.
Yes, building altars. It's a signature patriarchal move, and it's more than just saying thank you. As folks like Wenham and Matthews suggest, building an altar right there at Shechem, maybe near that Canaanite tree, was a powerful symbolic act.
Like claiming the territory for God.
Exactly. Claiming the land for Yahweh, challenging the existing pagan claims. Our notes quote B. Jacob saying it was like taking possession with his hand of land which was already occupied. It's thanksgiving, dedication, a memorial, and a public claim.
Powerful stuff.
Wow.
And he keeps moving. Verse 8. From there he moved on to the hill country east of Bethel and pitched his tent, with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. There he built an altar to the Lord and called on the name of the Lord.
He goes south from Shechem, into the hills between Bethel and Ai, two other Canaanite towns. And notice the pattern. He pitched his tent.
The temporary dwelling, the sojourner status.
Right. It highlights he's living in the land, but not settling down like the locals. Our notes mention a term from ancient texts, nawe, for camps outside cities, suggesting this intentional distinction.
But alongside the temporary tent, he built another permanent altar.
Yes. Again, claiming the land spiritually. And here, it adds another action. He called on the name of the Lord.
What does that mean exactly, more than just prayer?
Oh, yeah. That phrase implies public worship, proclaiming God's name, invoking Yahweh openly. It's a declaration of allegiance in a land full of other gods. So you get this rhythm: tent, temporary presence; altar, permanent claim; calling on God's name, public witness.
Tent and altar. Pilgrim faith in action.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay, verse 9 wraps up this first leg of the journey. Then Abram set out and continued toward the Negev.
He keeps heading south, moving by stages, towards the Negev, the arid southern region. This shows he's covering significant ground, exploring the breadth of the land from the center down south.
And it sets up the next part of the story, his trip to Egypt.
Right, it serves as a transition, but there's also that interesting point about the route itself.
The parallel with the later conquest.
Yes, scholars like Hamilton and Walton note that his route, Shechem, Betheli, moving south, mirrors the path Israel takes generations later when they enter the land. It might be intentional, kind of symbolic foreshadowing, establishing God's claim along that central spine of the land, even way back then.
Okay, we've walked through the passage, verse by verse, picking up some really rich details. Let's maybe zoom out now and connect some dots. What are some of the bigger scholarly insights that help us grasp the full weight of what's happening here? Sometimes the familiar stories hold surprises.
They really do. And looking at the bigger picture is crucial. One really powerful insight we touched on comes from someone like Bruce Waltke. He frames Abram's call in chapter 12 as God's direct answer, a counter-narrative to the rebellion at Babel back in chapter 11.
So they're not just sequential, they're intrinsically linked, like problem and solution.
Exactly. Think about those parallels again. Babel. Human pride, trying to force unity, wanting to make a name for themselves. The result, God scatters the peoples. Confusion, division.
And then Genesis 12.
Genesis 12 is God's gracious initiative. He calls one man. Instead of humans making their own name, God says, I will make your name great. And crucially, instead of scattering the peoples, God starts a plan through Abram to bless all peoples on earth. The same word.
Wow, reversing the curse of Babel through the blessing of Abram.
Precisely. Abram's call isn't just the start of Israel's story, it's God's strategy to redeem the scattered nations. It positions the Abrahamic covenant right at the center of God's global plan.
That completely elevates the significance, doesn't it? It's world-changing from the very start.
Fundamentally. Another interesting area our notes touch on is how we picture Abram himself. Joyce Baldwin, for instance, challenges that common image of him as just a simple wandering nomad.
Oh, how so?
Well, she argues his background was urban. Ur and Haran were sophisticated cities. His move wasn't just seasonal migration, it was a radical, once-off uprooting from that settled urban life.
So he wasn't naturally a nomad?
Probably not culturally. And his actions later, like wanting land for his descendants, buying the cave at Machpelah for a permanent burial site, these point to a desire for settlement, for roots in the land God promised.
So the tent dwelling in Canaan, it wasn't his preference, but his situation.
Exactly. It symbolized his status as a pilgrim, a sojourner in a land currently owned and occupied by others. He wasn't integrating into the Canaanite cities. He was living distinctly, temporarily, in the land God promised him.
Which connects back to the importance of those altars he built.
Yes. Scholars like Wenham, Sailhammer, even B. Jacob, they emphasize these were much more than just private prayer spots.
What was the deeper public statement?
By building altars at key places like Shechem and Bethel, maybe near existing pagan sites, Abram was making a symbolic public claim. Sailhammer calls it establishing a spiritual beachhead. He's dedicating the land to Yahweh, challenging the spiritual status quo.
Like planting God's flag through worship.
That's a great image for it. As Jacob put it, taking possession with his hand. It foreshadows the later conquest. It's proactive, almost a missionary act in a way.
That adds such a dynamic layer to his actions. He's not just passively waiting.
Not at all. And finally, that point from Von Rad about the destination being initially unspecified, the land I will show you, that's just so key to understanding the nature of his faith.
The radical trust required.
Yes. To go without knowing the endpoint. It demands abandoning all human security, all your own plans, and relying completely on God's step-by-step guidance. Von Rad sees this blind obedience not just as Abram's story, but as a paradigm for Israel, maybe even for all believers.
Living by faith, trusting God's guidance, even when the destination is foggy.
Exactly. Trusting the guide, even when you can't see the map. That's the heart of faith, isn't it?
It really is. Okay, these ancient words, these scholarly insights, they aren't just history lessons. They speak powerfully to us today, don't they? Especially for those in ministry, in leadership. What are some core teachings we can draw out for life and ministry right now?
Absolutely. One of the most central, maybe most challenging, is that call to a life of, well, radical faith and obedience. Abram's story kicks off with God asking him to leave everything comfortable and familiar for something totally unknown, based only on God's word.
And that pattern continues for us as disciples, doesn't it? Stepping out of comfort zones.
It has to. It means being willing to let go of things we cling to for security, maybe career paths, cultural expectations, certain relationships, financial safety nets if God calls us elsewhere or asks us to prioritize Him above them.
How can leaders foster that kind of costly faith?
Well, first by modeling it, right? Preaching a faith that's active, not just mental agreement. Obedience even when it hurts, even when it seems illogical by worldly standards, like Abram at 75 setting out to become a great nation.
Helping people identify their own country, kindred, father's household, the things they might need to leave behind or hold more loosely.
Exactly. What are the things you rely on that compete with trusting God fully? And encouraging that trust in God's promises before the whole path is clear. That's what Hebrews 11 highlights about Abram. He went not knowing where he was going. Ministry leadership often feels exactly like that, doesn't it? Stepping out in faith.
It certainly does, which leads to that other crucial truth.
Yeah.
This whole thing starts with God's initiative and His unmerited grace.
This is fundamental.
Right.
Abram didn't earn this. He didn't seek God out first. He was from Ur, a city of idolaters, as Joshua 24 reminds us. God chose him. God initiated. God gave the promises.
He did nothing to deserve it.
Nothing. It powerfully underscores God's sovereign grace. Our salvation, our calling, our place in God's plan, it's not based on our merit, our background, our spiritual resume. It's purely His unmerited favor.
How should that truth shape our ministry?
Oh, it should bring deep humility, immense gratitude. It means the gospel we preach must be about grace, a gift received by faith. In pastoral care, it reminds us God's acceptance isn't based on performance. It frees people from that burden.
And it helps us see potential where we might not expect it.
Absolutely. If God could call an idolater from Ur to be the father of faith, He can call anyone. It breaks down our prejudices and reminds us grace is always surprising.
And then there's that amazing twist. Abram was blessed to be a blessing. All peoples on earth will be blessed through you.
Yeah.
That missional core.
Yes. This is so critical. God didn't bless Abram just for Abram's own sake or just for his immediate family group. He was blessed specifically to be a conduit of blessing to others, ultimately to everyone.
So for us today, the blessings we receive, salvation, gifts, resources, they're not just for us to keep.
Exactly. We are meant to be channels of God's love, grace, truth, hope, justice, whatever He's given us. It's meant to flow through us to the world around us. We're part of that ongoing Abrahamic mission.
How do we live that out practically as individuals and churches?
It means actively participating in God's mission. That looks different for everyone, but it involves things like hearing the gospel, serving needs, pursuing justice, living distinctively in our communities and workplaces. It means supporting global missions.
And for pastors.
It means consistently teaching that the church exists not just for itself, for its own programs and members, but as God's primary means of blessing the wider community in the world. It requires intentionally shifting focus from inward maintenance to outward mission, reflecting the heart of God's promise to Abram. So as we wrap up this deep dive into Genesis 12:1 to 9, we've really seen how God's radical call to Abram isn't just a random event. It's a hinge point in redemptive history, a surprising, gracious response to human failure.
Yes, a call rooted entirely in God's sovereign choice and grace, yet demanding profound faith and costly obedience from Abram, leaving everything behind for an unknown future.
And accompanied by these almost unbelievably vast promises, weren't they? A great nation from a barren couple, a great name bestowed by God, and ultimately, blessing flowing through him to all the families of the earth, reversing Babel's curse.
Abram's immediate response, just going, and his actions in Canaan, building altars, calling on God's name while living in a tent, showed his faith in tangible ways, claiming the land for God, living as a distinct sojourner.
And these ancient verses, they still resonate powerfully today, don't they? They challenge us to live by that same kind of faith, following God even when it's unclear, trusting His big promises, living with an eternal perspective, making worship central, and embracing our role as channels of His blessing to the world.
So for you listening, particularly if you're in ministry leadership, here's something to reflect on. How does Abram's willingness to radically obey, to leave the familiar for an unknown future based only on God's word, challenge how you might define security or success or even faithfulness in your own context right now? Are there comfortable shores God might be calling you to leave?
And building on that, think about the foundation of grace. Abram was called and promised immense blessing before he'd proven anything. Then, he was immediately tasked with being that blessing to others, ultimately to the whole world. How does that dual reality, receiving unmerited grace and being commissioned for outward mission, shape your understanding of your own calling? How does it shape the core purpose of the church you serve? How can we better embody the truth that God blesses us not primarily for our own accumulation, but for his glorious purpose of transmission?
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.